This conference will now be recorded.
Hello. Okay. Hello. Hi, everybody. So, are you there, all of you?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So now that you have already heard about the normal uterine action and normal labor, now you will be learning about an abnormal uterine action. And all of you are aware that for normal labor to occur, you have 3 P's. Is it not? You know those things. Okay. Power, passenger, and passage. These 3 are very important for a normal labor. Right? So now we are going to learn about the power, that is the uterine activity. The passage is the pelvis. Then the passenger is the fetus. Okay, today you are going to learn about, so all the normal 3 P's you have learned, you are going to learn now about the abnormal P's in the power, that is abnormal uterine action, right? So before we actually go for the abnormalities, what are the normal uterine contractions? This is just a review. So normal uterine contractions, all of you know that there is normal polarity has to be maintained. Polarity means when the upper uterine segment is contracting and retracting, the lower segment is dilating and relaxing. That is known as a normal polarity during a normal labor. So upper segment and the lower segment, they have to diverge actions. So when the upper uterine segment is contracting and retracting, the lower segment will be dilating and relaxing to receive the baby. That is known as the normal polarity of the uterus. And the pacemakers are situated at the each corner of the uterus so that the contraction will spread in a coordinating manner. Okay. So there are the 2 pacemakers at the each uterine cornea, which are the ones which are generating the contraction waves. So the pattern of the uterine contractions, it propagates down towards the lower uterine segment with a decrease in intensity and duration of the contraction as they are coming downwards. That means the maximum contraction will be there at the level of the fundus. So as it is coming downwards, you find that the contractions will reduce. That is referred to as the gradient of physiological gradient of diminishing uterine activity. So that has to be maintained for a normal labor to occur. Right? So this is just what you have already heard before. So what are the parameters of uterine contractions? So the basal tone should not be more than 20 millimeters of mercury. It should be around 5 to 20. Then the peak pressure should be around 60 millimeters of mercury. It may sometimes go even up to 80 also, particularly during the second stage of contractions. Then the frequency of contractions are usually there should be 3 contractions in every 10 minutes or 1 in 3 minutes lasting for 45 seconds. So the uterine contractions are said to be adequate when there are 3 in 10 minutes. Each contraction should last for 30 to 45 seconds, not less, not more. Right? So these are the basic parameters of the uterine contraction. And the most important thing is normal polarity has to be maintained and normal physiological gradient has to be maintained. So how do you assess uterine contractions? Most commonly, we assess them by a clinical palpation. So just put a hand onto the abdomen and you can feel the uterus contracting and you can observe it, how long it is contracting and how well it is contracting. Right? You can feel the hardness that will tell you about the intensity of the contraction and you see how long it is lasting. Okay, is it lasting for 30 seconds to 45 seconds or is it more or is it less? Okay? That is the best way of examination. But now that we want every, that is a subjective variation will be there and there is no record. Whereas now we have CTG machines, cardiotopogram machines. All of you would have seen we have in the labor room. So it records both the fetal heart as well as the contractions. So that is known as a cardiotopogram, topodynamometer. Right. So this is external monitoring, where the transducers are placed over the abdomen of the patient, and which it will measure the uterine contraction. There is another transducer where you have to locate the fetal heart and put it, and then you have to tie them. so that the fetal heart also can be recorded. So this will be for the record purposes. But this external transducer, it is not directly applied to the uterus, is it not? It is applied onto the abdomen. So what it is measuring is actually the strength of the abdominal muscle contraction, not the uterus actually. So it doesn't tell you about the strength or intensity of the contraction. It will only tell you how many contractions are occurring and what is the interval between the contractions. It doesn't tell you about the strength of the uterine contraction, right? So another one is the intrauterine pressure catheter called IUPC, which is placed internally. So that is important for measuring the strength of the uterine contraction, but it is an invasive technique and the membranes have to be ruptured to place a intrauterine pressure catheter. But the advantage is it measures even the pressure of the uterine contraction, strength of the uterine contraction also. So this is an external tocodynamometer. So upper strip will tell you about the fetal hearts, right? The lower part of it will tell you about the uterine contractions. Okay, so these are the usual, each one is around 1 minute, and you have, say, in 10 minutes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Roughly you are having around 3 contractions. So there is well relaxation between. So between each contraction there should be a good relaxation. So this is the time where the blood supply is going to the uterus. Whereas during the contraction there is shut off of the blood supply for the baby, right? And the pressure is usually around 75 to 80 millimeters of mercury. This is the peak of the contraction, and this is the resting tone. It should come back to the resting tone. That is important. So the normal uterine contractions. So the contractions here are every 2 to 3 minutes, right? One is the first minute, and 1, 2, the third minute again there is another contraction. 1 second, another contraction. This is a normal uterine contraction at the normal resting tone. It's coming back again to baseline, and each contraction is not lasting for more than 1 minute. Sometimes they are not lasting. Probably these are the first stage contractions. So you don't find the contraction lasting for more than, see, each one is 10 seconds. So it is not lasting for even 20 seconds, right? Then the pressure is usually calculated. This is internal monitoring using an IUPC, that is intrauterine pressure catheter. So that will tell you about the intrauterine pressures. So these are the baseline pressures, that is around 20 millimeters of mercury, which is necessary for cervical dilatation. So usually the contraction forces are reported as Montevideo units, MVU units. So that is the total intensity. So you add all these contractions in 10 minutes. How many contractions are there in 10 minutes? And add the pressures, 75 plus 60 plus 50 plus 45. It will give you a 230 Montevideo units. Any MVU which is more than 200 is adequate for a normal labor. And always when you are measuring the pressure, you have to subtract the basal tone and then take the pressure. So this is possible only in internal monitoring, not in external monitoring. Okay, right. So what do you mean by abnormal uterine action? So anything which is deviating from this normal pattern of uterine contraction, which will affect the normal course of labor, is known as an abnormal uterine contraction, right? So of all uterine labor abnormalities, these abnormal uterine action will occur in mostly in nulliparous, that is in primigravida individuals, and 10% of multis, right? Okay. So how do you classify? Anyway, whenever you say an abnormal uterine action, always it will be more or it will be less, right? So it is inefficient or it is over efficient. So inefficient uterine activity is where hypoactive states, which is known as uterine inertia. That means the uterus is not contracting very well, or even if it is contracting, it is not sufficient to bring about normal labor. Or it may be hyperactive and incoordinate states. That is hyperactive lower uterine segment, a colicky uterus, a constriction ring, or a cervical dystocia. Okay, inefficient in the sense they are contracting, but they are not able to bring about a normal labor, right? Then over efficient uterine activity is where precipitate labor and tetanic uterine activity. So this is the one of the classifications for abnormal uterine activity. Inefficient, that is hypoactive or hyperactive. Hyperactive lower segment, colic uterus, constriction ring, cervical dysocias. Whereas over efficient uterine activity is precipitate labors and tetanic uterine contractility. So this is also another way of classifying the abnormal uterine action into those uterine action where the normal polarity is maintained and where the polarity is disturbed, abnormal polarity. So normal polarity is maintained. Polarity in the sense the upper segment is contracting and retracting, the lower segment is dilating and relaxing, receiving the baby. So the normal polarity is maintained in uterine inertia, then in excessive contractions, hyperstimulations, that is precipitate labors, tonic uterine contractions and retraction. So these are the conditions where the normal polarity is maintained. Whereas abnormal polarity, where there's a disturbance of polarity, is a spastic lower uterine segment. That is, instead of dilating and relaxing, it has become spastic. Then the cervix is also supposed to dilate and allow the passage of the baby. The cervix is going into the lower uterine segment. Then any constriction ring, that is the localized activity of localized muscle spasm, is called a constriction ring. Then generalized tonic contractions without any proper relaxation. These are the abnormal polarity. So you can divide abnormal uterine action even like this also. Normal polarity and abnormal polarity, hypoactive and hyperactive. So for all the causes for abnormal uterine action, they are almost the same. So most of the cases we don't know the cause, it is obscure, but following conditions are supposed to be associated with abnormal uterine action, any type of uterine action for that matter. Like elderly preemies and prolonged pregnancies, that is past dates or post-dated pregnancies. Then whenever uterus is over-distended, right? Multiple pregnancy, hydramnias, any tumors complicating pregnancies, large babies, diabetic infant and so on. Then contracted pelvis, right? Then malpresentations, malpositions also like obstetric posterior positions. Then obesity. Then psychological factors. Actually, to the 3 P's which have been described for a successful labor, another P also has to be added. That is the psych factor of the patient. The patient should be well educated to face this pain of the labor. So emotional factors like anxiety and stress also play a very important role in causing uterine abnormalities, uterine action abnormalities. And then drug-induced, injudicious administration of sedatives, analgesics, oxytocin, anesthetic agents, or prostaglandins. So exact cause we don't know, but these are supposed to be some of the factors which are associated with abnormal uterine action. Any type of uterine action, the causes will be the same. Elderly preemie gravida, past dates, over-distended uterus, contracted pelvis, malpresentations, malpositions, obesity, emotionally distressed patient, anxiety and stress, and injudicious administration of sedations, analgesics, and oxytocin. Right? So excessive uterine contractions. So these are the terminologies that are given for excessive uterine contractions. There's polysystole. Poly means more frequent, is it not? So when the contractions are occurring more than once every 2 minutes. So normally we want the uterine contractions to occur for every 3 minutes. Roughly 3 in 10 minutes means every 3 minutes there should be one contraction. But here it is poly. Poly means more than 1 in every 2 minutes. Then the hyperstimulation is the same response, but the patient is on either induction of labor or augmentation of labor in response to either oxytocin or even a misoprostol. Right? That is called hyperstimulation. So polysystole is in spontaneous labor. The same terminology. If she is on oxytocin or on prostaglandins, you call it as hyperstimulation because you are stimulating the labor. What do you mean by induction of labor? You are stimulating the uterus to contract. So now, if she is having more contractions, you call it as hyperstimulation. If it is a natural labor, you call it as a polysystole. Then tetanic uterine contraction. Tetanic means a single contraction. Normally, it should not last for more than 45 seconds or at the most 1 minute. But here, single contraction is lasting for more than 3 minutes. That is called a tetanic uterine contraction. Then hypertonic. So that's the name itself is suggesting. Hypertonic means where the baseline pressure is about 20 millimeters of mercury. So the patient feels pain at about 15 millimeters or 20 millimeters. She feels that pain. So in cases of hypertonic uterine contraction, the uterus is not relaxed at all. So the patient is never free of pain. See, he will have continuous pain because there is no adequate relaxation. Right? So these are the terminologies that are given for excessive uterine contractions, polysystole, hyperstimulation, tetanic uterine contractions, hypertonic uterine contraction. They may or may not be associated with fetal heart abnormalities, depending upon the fetal reserve, how much the fetus can withstand the hypoxia. Depending on that, the fetal heart abnormalities may be present or may not be present. Right? So these are the uterine contractions. So each square is 1 minute here. So in this, up to here, it is 10 minutes. So you see in 10 minutes, the patient is having 1, 2, 3, another small one, 4, 5, 6, 7 contractions is having in 10 minutes. So if you look at the graph, you can make out whether the patient is having normal uterine contractions or she is having hyperstimulation. So this is an excessive uterine contraction. At like polysystole, if it is spontaneous labor, if it is augmented labor, then you call it as a hyperstimulation. Right? Sometimes even the resting tone is more. You see, after this contraction, it has come to baseline level, whereas here continuously it is high. Okay, so it may be associated even with hypertonic action also. Some contractions are coming back, some are not coming back. The resting tone is more than 20. So there is no sufficient relaxation in between the contractions. So that's the reason why you find here the fetal heart is, there is a deceleration. Can you see? So the deceleration has started here below 120. Okay, so it has come to 100. Then see how long it is taking to go back to normal. See, so much time it is taking to go back to normal. So any deceleration which is more than 3 minutes, you call it as a prolonged deceleration. So here the fetal heart, let us say now it is 100. So from 100 again to go back, see, it is taking such a long period to go back to normal. That means it is taking more than 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3, 4, 5 minutes it is taking to go back. So any deceleration which is lasting for more than 3 minutes, you call it as a prolonged deceleration, which usually indicates a sign of fetal hypoxia, and immediate intervention is required. That means if she is an oxytocin, you stop the oxytocin, put her on left lateral position, administer oxygen. And if she has no risk factors, if it is only the oxytocin drip which is causing this pattern, then you can wait and see whether the fetal heart will go back to normal. Probably that was done in this case. Now you see the fetal heart has gone back to normal. See, can you see this? It has gone back to normal, though there is now uterine contractions are still continuing. So probably after stopping, then probably it will go back to normal. So the management depends upon the risk factors and the scenario of the case. You cannot pinpoint just based on the CTG. You can't pinpoint and say the subsequent management of the case. Depends upon the cause, other risk factors of the patient. Suppose is it a TOLAC you are giving? Is it a trial of labor you are giving? Is she an elderly gravida? Is it a case of preeclampsia? So depending on the clinical scenario, you will decide what to do. So when do you say uterine hyperstimulation? So these are the criteria to say that the uterus is hyperstimulated. When the contraction is lasting for more than 90 seconds, when the relaxation between the contractions is less than 30 seconds, when the contractions are occurring more frequently than every 2 minutes, that means more than 5 in 10 minutes, and the peak pressure is going above 80 millimeters of mercury. So these are the criteria for saying uterine hyperstimulation. So each contraction is lasting for more than 90 seconds. The relaxation in between is less than 30 seconds. The contractions are, that's what in the previous graph you have seen. See here you can see the previous, there is no relaxation at all. Right? But fortunately the contractions are not lasting for more than half a minute, hardly. Right? So any one of them can be present to say hyperstimulation. So here relaxation is not there, the contractions are more frequent. the peak pressure of the contraction above 80 millimeters of mercury. See, here it is going above 80. Can you see this? All of you, it is going up to 90, right? Can you see the graph, all of you?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, very good. So can you see? There is no sufficient relaxation between the contraction. It is not, it should be 30 seconds. So here there is relaxation, it has come back to normal. But here you don't find sufficient relaxation. But the peak pressure is touching up to 90. It is more than 90. The contractions are more than 5 in 10 seconds. So when such a picture is there, you call it as a uterine hyperstimulation if she is on oxytocin or prostaglandin induction or augmentation of labor, or polycystole if it is. So these are the normal uterine contractions. Can you see? If you look at the normal uterine contractions, can you say this? So much of relaxation is there in between the contractions, right? And there are hardly 1, 2, 3 contractions. So in 10 minutes, each one is 1 minute. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. In 10 minutes, she is hardly having 2 contractions, right? And then you see the peak, it is not crossing. It is reaching up to 40. It is 40. This is 60. So hardly it is reaching up to 50. It is not lasting for more than half a minute, right? So from here to here, it is hardly half a minute. So even the fetal heart is also normal. Okay, there are some accelerations also in between. So that's a good sign. There are no decelerations. The variability is also normal, right? So this is a hyperventilation, a hyperstimulation. Can you see? So many contractions are occurring here. The down graph. Can you see, all of you? So too many contractions are there. Even the basal tone is also increased. There is no relaxation in between the contractions, and you find the fetal heart is also going down, right? It has gone down and again it is picking up, but still you find decelerations here. Okay. So this is about the uterine hyperstimulation. In uterine inertia, we already said it is a hypoactive. So this can be primary. That means it can be there even from the right from the beginning of the labor, or it can develop later on after a variable period of effective contractions, where you find either arrest of descent or arrest of dilatation. So it can be primary or it can be secondary after a variable period of effective contractions. The features are all are reduced, right? The intensity has reduced, the duration of the contractions is also less, the interval between the contraction is increased, there is very good relaxation, and normal polarity is maintained. Only thing is it's not effective, right? Patient feels less pain during the contractions. Per abdomen, if you palpate, there will be less hardening of the uterus. Even in between, even during a contraction, you will be able to indent the uterine wall. Okay, normally it should be as hard as a stone. You should not be able to indent with the finger. So easily indentable uterine wall, that shows you that the intensity is not proper. Fetal parts are well palpable, fetal heart is normal, and per vaginal examination you see that there is poor cervical dilatation. So normally you expect the cervix to dilate when you are putting the partogram. All the cases you have to put a partogram. So when you are plotting the graph, you find that the cervical dilatation is poor or slow. So normally it should be around 1 centimeter in a per hour in a primi and more than 1.5 in a multi. So depending on that, if you are, when you are plotting the graph, you will know that the cervix is not dilating as per the requirement. So it may be associated conditions you have to rule out. So it may be a contracted pelvis, it may be a disproportion, maybe a large baby, then malpresentations, malpositions, maybe a deflex attitude of the head, which is mostly associated with occipito posterior position. So whenever you find that there is an arrest of dilatation or arrest of descent or prolonged dilatation, prolonged distance. So those are all abnormalities of the labor, which will be dystocia, it is called. That they will tell you again when we are discussing about dystocia. So you will find that the dilatation is not proceeding well. Always be on the lookout for contracted pelvis, disproportion, malpresentations which you would have missed in the antenatal period, malpositions, deflexed attitude, right? So management, general measures, psychological therapy to the patient, support. So you assure the patient that nothing is wrong either with the mother or with the baby. Only the thing is the uterus is not contracting sufficiently to cause cervical dilatation and descent to the baby. So avoid supine position, empty bladder and rectum, and maintain the hydration, because naturally the mother will not be taking anything as she is in labor. So maintain the intake output chart, maintain hydration. Then active measures are, if there is some amount of dilatation at least up to 2 to 3 centimeters, you can do a low rupture of membranes followed by an oxytocin drip in escalating doses until you get an effective uterine contractions. Right? Effective means 2 to 3 in 10 minutes, each lasting for 45 seconds, 30 to 45 seconds, not more. Right? So uterine inertia, usually the fetus will not be affected. There are no fetal heart changes because uterine contractions are not very effective. Only thing is the mother may become anxious and distressed. That's the only thing problem with the uterine inertia. So role of cesarean section is only when it is associated with contracted pelvis or disproportions. Then when you have not diagnosed a malpresentation in the antenatal period, usually you don't find any fetal distress in uterine inertia because uterine is not action is not there. There's no chance for hypoxia for the baby. But the mother may go into little distress because of lack of intake of fluids. So that's about the hypotonic uterine inertia. Only reassure the patient. See whether you have missed anything associated contracted pelvis or disproportions or malpresentations, malpositions. Depending on that, you take the action. If everything is all right, the pelvis is good, the baby is average size, the liquor is adequate, she has no risk factors, then if at least the 2 centimeter dilatation and cervix is well taken up, you can do a low rupture of membrane. If the cervix is long, you can always prime the cervix using the prostaglandin E2 gel. Then precipitate labor is exactly the opposite of inertia, where you find that the combined duration of the first and second stages of labor is less than 2 hours. So in 2 hours, the mother expels the baby, which is mostly seen in grand multipara. Grand multipara is the one who has delivered more than 5 viable fetuses before. She's called a grand multipara. So this is both because of hyperactive uterine contractions as well as diminished soft tissue resistance. Because she is a multi, probably there is so much of perineal damage, pelvic floor damage to this patient. So it is not offering any resistance on the soft muscles. Pelvic floor muscles have become very soft, so they don't offer any resistance. So the first stage is not under our control. The second stage is under the control of the mother. Right? First stage is fast because of the hyperactive uterine contractions. Second stage is also very fast, probably few minutes, because of the diminished soft tissue resistance, lack pelvic floor, not offering any resistance and so on. So that is called a precipitate labor, where the duration of labor is less than 2 hours, which is both because of hyperactive uterine action and diminished pelvic resistance. So this is the same figure which we have seen. Hyperactive uterine contractions. When the uterus is contracting so fast, then you find that the baby comes down very fast, and then it is expelled very fast because the maternal soft tissues are not offering any resistance. So this is associated with some maternal and fetal complications. Fetal complications like intracranial damage, intracranial hemorrhages and so on, because there is no time for the baby to adjust itself to the curve of the birth canal. And sometimes the patient may be standing and suddenly the baby will fall onto the floor, and we have seen people delivering in bathrooms or in the corridors. Suddenly the baby comes out and then it may be fracture skulls under the so then the cord also may snap off and there may be bleeding from the torn cord from both the sides, from the maternal side as well as from the fetal side. So most important are the intracranial hemorrhages to the baby, and sometimes the baby may fall onto the floor suddenly, and then it may hit and there may be fractures of the skull and associated hemorrhages and so on. Then maternal complications are also there, like extensive lacerations of the cervix, vagina, and perineum because the baby is coming so fast out. Then postpartum hemorrhage may be mostly traumatic. The uterus, which has functioned so vigorously during labor, it relaxes. So it thinks it has done its function by pushing out the baby. Its job is over and it silently keeps quiet. So atonic PPH is very, very common in these individuals because of hypertonic uterus. Not only atonic, even traumatic postpartum hemorrhage also may be there because of lacerations of the cervix, vagina, and so on. Then inversion of the uterus also is common in these individuals. Very, very rarely you find a uterine rupture. Then infection because the grand multi is already anemic, blood loss, PPH, and so on. And rarely there may be even amniotic fluid embolism because of uterine hyperstimulation. When the uterus is contracting so fast, some of the amniotic fluid may enter into the maternal circulation and cause amniotic fluid embolism. Of course, this is very rare. The only common things you have to remember are the traumatic or atonic postpartum hemorrhage. This is very, very common in precipitate labors, right? Then what do you do for precipitate labor? See, these patients usually have a previous history. If you ask them what was the duration of labor in the first time, they usually say she has delivered very fast. So patients with such a history should be hospitalized prior to the labor and do an elective induction of labor by only an ARM, artificial rupture of membrane. Don't start oxytocin or misoprostol, either for augmentation or for induction. Just do an ARM and ask the patient to be in bed, whole of first stage and whole of second stage. That way you can avoid injuries to the baby. Then during labor, sometimes if the contractions are very vigorous, then you can suppress it either with ether or magnesium sulfate, or nowadays we can even give this terbutaline injections are available, right? Tocolytic agents. Then liberal episiotomy has to be given to prevent lacerations, and very controlled delivery of the baby has to be done. So this can be only prevented if you have a previous history. Otherwise, it's difficult to prevent these cases. So if you have a previous history, don't allow the woman. Normally, we allow the patients ambulant in the first stage of labor. Is it not? All low-risk cases, grand multis with a previous good obstetric record. But in this case, you have to keep them in the bed, and always don't give them any oxytocin or prostaglandins. Right? If the contractions are too vigorous, you can use magnesium sulfate or terbutaline. Next comes the tonic uterine contraction and retraction. That is what happens in obstructed labor. That is Bandel's ring, pathological retraction ring. So this is a pathological anatomy where the contractions will increase in intensity, duration, and frequency with the decreased relaxation in between. So contraction and retraction will continue, whereas the lower segment also progressively dilates and thinned out, and then it develops a demarcation between the upper uterine and the lower uterine segment, which is referred to as the Bandel's ring, which is a pathological retraction ring. Right? This is seen in obstructed labor, pathognomonic of obstructed labor. It is very, very important that you have to recognize the Bandel's ring, recognize the cause for obstruction, and immediate take care of for a C-section. Otherwise, it will end up in a rupture uterus. Right? So this is a normal retraction ring. That is the demarcation between the contracting and retracting upper uterine segment and dilating and thinning out of the lower uterine segment, which usually we will not be able to see this ring. Whereas in obstructed labor, there is some obstruction. So the causes of obstruction can be anywhere again. It may be in the passage or it may be in the passenger, right? So in such cases, you find that there is a gradual rise of this demarcation between the upper uterine segment and the lower uterine segment. It starts rising up. So if you have not recognized in time, it ultimately leads to obstructed labor. So the groove will not be just circular like this. Usually you can make out between obliquely. It won't be exactly in the center, a circle like this. So it will be usually an oblique because of dextrorotation of the fetus and the fundus also doesn't enlarge uniformly in pregnancy. So one cornea may enlarge more than the other one. So you find from this ring stretching from one round ligament to the other round ligament in a oblique manner, not just like this. So this is a pathological retraction ring. Right? So as see the response of the uterus. So when there is some problem with the passage or with the passenger, in a primary gravida reaction will be different from that of a reaction in a multi. So in a multi primary gravida uterus thinks there is some problem somewhere. I'm not able to push this baby down. So let me keep quiet. Right? So it will go into a state of relaxation. Right? That means it goes into uterine inertia. That's the reason why whenever you see that there is a, first when we were talking, in a partogram you have to see whether if the cervical dilatation is delaying, you have to look for the causes. One of the causes we said it may be a contracted pelvis or a disproportion, malpresentation or malposition. So I have to look for it. So a primary gravida responds to the obstruction, either in the pelvis, either in the passage or in the passenger, is going into inertia. Right? Labor comes to a standstill because it is inexperienced. It thinks there is some problem. I'm not able to push out this baby. Let me keep quiet. Whereas in a multi, it acts smart. It thinks, particularly in a grand multi, it thinks I have delivered so, I have pushed out so many babies before, 3 babies or 4 babies or 5 babies. Why not this time? So it acts very smart and it starts contracting more vigorously. So when it comes across some obstruction in the form of a, let us say, transverse eyebrow presentation, or in multis, usually you don't expect the pelvis to be smaller because she has delivered before normally. But with successive pregnancies, the birth weight of the baby increases. So it is paradoxical. We say anemias are more common, they are more prone for so many other infections, anemias. But still we say malnutrition, vitamin deficiency, this and that. But it has been noted that the birth weight of the babies in successful pregnancies increases. So multis will have larger babies. So that way it may produce a cephalopelvic disproportion, not exactly a contracted pelvis, because she has delivered normal sized babies before, or it may be a malpresentation. So a multigravida uterus thinks, I have delivered so many times before, why not this time? There is some problem, let me act more vigorously so that I can push out this baby. So it starts contracting more vigorously. That will lead to thinning of the lower uterine segment, progressive dilatation and thinning of the lower uterine segment, and the Bandel's ring moves up and up towards umbilicus, and ultimately the lower segment is no longer is able to dilate. It will rupture. So that leads to rupture of the uterus and fetal distress and fetal death. So that's the response of a primary compared to a multi whenever there is some obstruction. So it's very, very important to diagnose the Bandel's ring. First of all, if there is any abnormality when you are putting the partogram, there will be 2 lines. So when you are told about partogram, they will tell you about how to mark the most important events in the labor are cervical dilatation and descent. Is it not? When you are plotting these two, the 2 lines will be there. One is an alert line and the other one is an action line. So whenever the graph has reached the alert line, you should become alert and look back and see what are we missing in this case. Are we missing any? If she is a primary, you have to look for contracted pelvis. If it is a multi, look for malpresentations and malpositions and cephalopelvic disproportions. So these are the common things: contracted pelvis, disproportions, malpresentations, malpositions. These are the 4 things always you have to keep in mind whenever there is some abnormality in the progressive labor in dystocia, right? So whenever it has approached to the alert line, you have to go back and review the case again. What is wrong? Have I missed anything? Then when it still crosses and comes to the action line, you have to take some action, right? Either if she is in very early labor, you have to go for a cesarean section. If she is already fully dilated, you can do an assisted vaginal delivery or an operative vaginal. So that will be told to you when we are dealing with an obstructed labor. Okay, here the clinical feature, the patient will be very anxious because she has in labor for such a long time, features of exhaustion, maternal exhaustion and ketoacidosis. So this should not happen in modern obstetrics. In modern obstetrics, there is no role for um, no role for maternal distress. Okay, always remember, no role for this exhaustion and ketoacidosis should never happen in modern obstetrics. You should never allow any woman to go into exhaustion, and that that situation should not arise if you are properly following up the patient. You are putting a partogram, nicely following up the patient, right? So the upper uterine segment will become very tender and very hard. The lower segment becomes distended and very tender. You can see the groove in between the upper and lower uterine segments. That is known as the Bandel sting, which is called a pathological retraction ring. So treatment is correction of dehydration and acidosis, adequate pain relief, and give her antibiotics because it may be associated with premature rupture of membrane and she is in prolonged labor. Always exclude rupture of the uterus. In majority of the cases, it is an abdominal delivery. Okay, cesarean delivery in almost all the cases. So you are not supposed to do anything in presence of Bandel sting, right? So in modern obstetric, there should not be any Bandel sting. You should not allow any woman for, that's what is safe motherhood, right? And then next comes the incoordinate uterine action. Incoordinate uterine action is also a hypertonic uterine state, which usually appears in the active stage of labor. So where you find that the pacemakers will appear all over the uterus, not just at the cornu. So normal physiological gradient of diminishing activity is disturbed. So there is irregular spasmodic contractions of the uterus. Everywhere the uterus starts contracting instead of maintaining a normal diminishing gradient of activity. So increased frequency and duration of contraction with decreased relaxation in between, and there is a rise in the basal tone, right? Okay, so the features of incoordinate uterine action are the basal tone is increased, so that diminishes the placental circulation, and so that will diminish the placental circulation, and sometimes there may be even abruption of the placenta and lead to fetal distress, right? Then ineffective uterine contraction, right? So there will be poor dilatation. You don't find normal cervical dilatation and normal descent to the preg. Okay, there is increased tone leading to reduced placental blood circulation or sometimes separation of the placenta, and fetal distress will be there. And then it cannot cause normal dilatation and normal descent to the baby. And because of persistent pain, the mother will go into exhaustion, right? So patient is in agony with unbearable pain, dehydration, ketoacidosis, bladder distensions with often retention of urine. So this is one of the important factor you have to remember. Whenever you find that the bladder is getting distended very frequently and you are needing to catheterize the bladder frequently, that also indicates some abnormality in the either uterine action or some abnormality in the position or presentation of the fetus, right? So repeated bladder distension requiring repeated catheterization, which actually should be avoided. Any catheterization during labor should be avoided unless it's some high risk case where you need to maintain the IO chart, like preeclampsia, eclampsia, heart disease, and so on. Otherwise, all low risk cases, there's no need to catheterize the bladder unless she is in some shock or something. So just ask the patient to pass urine in a bedpan if she's not able to go to the washroom. So if you find that the bladder is distended, the patient is not able to pass urine, you need to put a simple rubber catheter, not the Foley's catheter, and then drain the bladder. You have to suspect there is some abnormality. So that's one point you have to always keep in labor whenever you are monitoring the patient in labor. Then abdominal examination will tell you that the uterus is very tender to palpate. There are uterine contractions with a poor relaxation in between. So that you can know either by putting your hand on the patient's abdomen, or by a CTG will tell you. The graph will tell you about the number of contractions, the way, and then the relaxation in between. Even though you may not be able to measure the pressure unless you put in IUPC. So the palpation of the fetal parts will become difficult because there is no sufficient relaxation, right? And there may be evidence of fetal hypoxia in the form of fetal tachycardia, bradycardia, decelerations, and so on, right? Then general examination will show you cervix is not dilating properly, descent is not proper. That you can make out even when you are putting a partogram, and evidence of fetal hypoxia in the form of a meconium staining of the liquor may be present. So treatment, again, correction of dehydration, adequate pain relief, empty the bladder, parenteral antibiotics. Then if necessary, you have to do even a cesarean section for these patients. Then spastic lower uterine segment is where these are all the diminished, disturbed polarity, right? Incoordinate uterine action, spastic lower uterine segment and all. Then the fundal dominance is lacking. There is reversed polarity, right? Whereas the lower uterine segment, instead of dilating and relaxing, it is becoming lower segment is contracting instead of dilating and stretching. So fundal dominance is, there is no fundal dominance as you say normally. So there is reversal of polarity. The lower segment, instead of dilating and relaxing, it is becoming spastic. It is contracting. There is inadequate relaxation in between the contraction. Premature bearing down will be there, but the cervix will not be dilating properly. So cervix will be loose, edematous, not well applied to the presenting part. So management, most of the cases may need a cesarean section. Time Chapara. So constriction ring is also known as a Scheide's ring, which appears in all stages of labor, whereas a Bandon's ring usually appears in advanced labor, in the second stage or late part of the first stage. So whereas a constriction ring can appear even in latent labor, even in the early first stage of labor, where there is a localized myometrial contraction. So this forms a circular muscle fibers, will become a ring. Most often it will be around the neck of the baby. So a few circular muscle fibers, that is myoma, the myometrium will constrict around the neck of the baby. That is known as a constriction ring. So usually it is situated at the junction of the upper and lower uterine segment, mostly around the constricted part of the fetus, mostly around the neck. Right? So this is a figure you can see. And there is a localized constriction. Can you see, all of you? Can you say this? This is the uterus. It is localized constriction around the neck. So the same thing can happen even around the knee of the patient also. Any small parts, okay, around the elbow, it can contract and keep like that. That is preventing the descent of the baby. But most commonly we see only around the neck of the patient, because it is at the junction of the upper and the uterine segment. But it can form anywhere. It can form around any fetal part. It can form in any stage of labor. So same thing. Causes maybe because of injudicious administration of oxytocin, then premature rupture of membranes. So where the whole liquor has drained out, and then the uterus may be stimulated to contract around the fetal part. Premature attempts at instrumental delivery also. Before full cervical dilatation, you apply a forceps, apply a vacuum. Then also the myometrium may be stimulated to form a ring. So here the mother is not usually affected. The fetal distress will be there because of compression of the umbilical cord. The ring is usually not palpable per abdomen. So it can be felt in the first stage. If you do a cesarean section, you will be able to make out. Or during the second stage when you are trying to deliver the baby by forceps or vacuum. And in third stage when you are doing a manual removal of the placenta, you suddenly found that the cornea will contract, right? You will not be able to remove that part of the placenta which is in the cornea of the uterus. So it can be seen in any stage of the labor, first stage, second stage, and the third stage. The delivery is usually by cesarean section. The ring is usually passes off. That means it relaxes when you deepen the plane of anesthesia. So if it is difficult, even after deepening the plane of anesthesia, the ring doesn't relax, you will not be able to deliver the baby, is it not? Then you may have to cut the ring vertically to deliver the baby, and later on you have to suture it. So the differences between the constriction ring and the pathological retraction ring or the Bandel's ring is, this is localized. Yes, this is a localized muscle contraction around the part of the baby, whereas this is the end result of tonic contraction and retraction, which is usually seen in obstructed labors. So this is due to undue irritability of the uterus, whereas this is following obstructed labor. The obstruction may be in the passage or in the passenger. This is usually at the junction of the upper and lower uterine segment, but can occur anywhere. But whereas a Bandel's ring is always at the junction of the upper and lower uterine segment, right? Then here the upper segment contracts and retracts with relaxation well in between. Whereas this is a tonically contracted upper uterine segment. Okay. Whereas the lower segment is thinned out. Whereas here the lower segment is very thick and loose. You will be able to pass your fingers through the lower uterine segment even when the uterus is contracting up. So these are some of the differences between the constriction ring and the pathological retraction ring or the Bandel's ring. Mind you, even physiologically also there is a retraction ring between that is the demarcation between the upper and lower uterine segment, but that is normal, which you will not feel. It is not associated with other problems in the mother or in the baby. This is the pathological retraction ring or the Bandel's ring, which is the hallmark of pathognomonic of obstructed labor. So in constriction ring, the maternal condition is usually unaffected unless there is a prolonged labor, whereas here always there is maternal exhaustion and sepsis. The ring is not felt per abdomen. This is felt as a groove. So round ligaments are all felt. Here you find the round ligaments are taut and tender. Per vaginal examination, the ring can be felt above the head, but here you can't feel anything per vaginal examination. So these are some of the differences between constriction ring and the pathological retraction ring or the Bandel's ring, right? So cervical dystocia is where there is a failure of cervix to dilate. So the dystocia is from the cervix. The problem is with the cervix, right? So it is called cervical dystocia. It can be primary or it can be secondary. Primary is when the external os fails to dilate and the prime is itself. Then that is maybe because of rigid cervix, or maybe because of insufficient uterine action, or because of malpresentation and malpositions. It is usually in primary. Whereas secondary is when there are some surgeries done on the cervix or previous deliveries, previous cervical tears following a cicatrization or suturing of the cervix and so on. So whenever you do some surgeries on the cervix, like previous Manchester repairs, previous conizations, previous all those loop surgeries, leads, okay, long loop excisions and so on. All those, whenever some procedures are done on the cervix, then the cervix may become cicatrized. Scarring will be there, which fails to dilate in subsequent pregnancies. Then following deliveries, then sometimes, very rarely in cervical cancers also, the cervix may, but of course very rare cervical cancer in pregnancy is very, very rare. So you need not mention about it. Just remember primary is in a primary where the external os fails to dilate. The internal os, everything dilates, but only the external os will not dilate to allow the passage. Secondary is following some surgeries on the cervix, like amputations, conizations. Times is Amma. Then management. Okay. Management, if only a thin rim of cervix is left behind, you can push it up. So push it up above the head if there is a thin rim of the cervix. If the cervix is not fully dilated, then you can give cervical incisions, which are referred to as the Juzzian's incisions. Of course, nowadays we are not seeing all these nowadays, because straight away most of these patients are being taken up for abdominal deliveries. So previously, when the facilities were not there, or the cases in health center where facilities are not there, in such cases cervical incisions can be given at 2 and 10 o'clock positions. Then immediately put a forceps or a ventouse extraction. These are called Juzzian's incisions. the same incisions we even give in prolapse complicating pregnancy, where the whole cervix is outside the uterus, and then naturally it doesn't dilate. So much of hypertrophy is there, so much of congestion is there, it won't dilate. So in such cases also, we give a Deuxen's incision, immediately put forceps or ventouse and remove the baby. So that's about cervical dystocia. Generalized tonic contractions are uterine tetanic contractions. So without any relaxation, and then the pressure will go up. So there is no physiological differentiation between upper uterine segment and the passive lower uterine segment. Pronounced retraction will occur involving the whole uterus up to the level of the uterine, up to the level of the internal os. So there is no demarcation. Physiological demarcation is not there between the active upper segment and the passive lower segment, right? Then whole uterus is going into a muscular spasm involved holding the fetus inside. See, the whole thing is contracting. Whole uterus is going into the spasm. So cause again always exclude CPDs, malpositions, malpresentations. Any cause for obstruction, injudicious use of oxytocins. Then features per abdomen, uterus is smaller in size, tense and tender. Fetal parts are not well polar because tetanic, there is no relaxation. Fetal heart sounds also you may not be able to make out, but now that CTG is there, it becomes very easy to diagnose all these abnormalities, both fetal abnormalities as well as the uterine action abnormalities. So per vaginal examination, you can see dry and edematous vagina. There will be a jammed head with a big, huge caput succedaneum. So tocolytic agents, terbutaline can be given to 50 mics subcutaneous injection, and most of the cases they need a cesarean delivery. Okay, so this is about uterine abnormalities. Only two things you have to remember: one is uterine inertia, other one is hypotensive stimulation, incoordinate uterine action, and Bandel string. These are the things you have to keep in mind. Spastic lower uterine segment cervical dystocias are very, very uncommon. Any doubts? All of you? Clear?
Yes,
Have
ma'am.
any doubts? Please ask. Yeah. So always this is very, very important. The differences between a constriction ring and a pathological retraction ring. So Bandel string may come as a short note question for you. So you should be able to diagnose a Bandel string, write about it, right? All of you?
Yes,
Have any
ma'am.
doubts? Please ask. Yeah, most welcome. We have some time for questions, right? So now that CTG is there, it has become easy to diagnose all these labor abnormalities. Right? So the moment you look at the graph, you will be able to say whether the uterus is contracting well or it is contracting less or more. Right? And then the response of the fetus to this uterine action. Okay? So the decision becomes easy studying the clinical scenario of the patient. Okay? Right? If you have any doubt, please ask me. So this is how should be a normal uterine contraction. This is a normal fetal heart. Then this is hyperstimulation associated with the deceleration in the fetal heart. So it becomes very easy nowadays when you are monitoring a patient in labor with a cardiotopogram. It may be continuous or it may be an intermittent CTG, right? Because you have too many patients in labor room and you have one or two machines because the machines are very expensive. So you just put it for a patient for some time, for half an hour or so. And then you can, if the graph is okay, then you can shift to the next patient. So it's not necessary that all cases have to be followed up by a CTG because CTG gives a lot of false positive tests, right? And so the rate of cesarean section, that's the problem with electronic fetal monitoring. It's called EFM. Electronic fetal monitoring, it's good, but the problem is the interpretation varies. So though the EFM was started, CTG and EFM was started in 1960s, almost 4 decades now, still there is no standardized terminology. There is so much of inter observer changes. and intra-observer also. Variability will be there. And 60% are false positive. So looking at the fetal heart decelerations, prolonged deceleration, particularly immediately take care of cesarean delivery, you find the baby's Apgar is good. There's no reason for that deceleration. So false positive tests are very high, and the rates of cesarean deliveries have gone up since EFM was introduced in 1960s and 70s. So even after so many decades of doing EFM, still we are not able to come to a conclusion. But then why are we doing it? Because we don't have any other way to monitor these babies. So that's the only way to monitor external. So internal is again associated with so many risks. So internal monitoring is also there, where you can record the fetal pulse oximeter can be done, fetal ECG can be taken, right? So those fetal scalp blood pH can be taken. So all those things can be taken, but they're all invasive procedures, right? Membranes need to be ruptured, and they're associated with some amount of morbidity, infections, and so on. So at present, we don't have any other way of monitoring except the external monitoring. This internal monitoring will be reserved only for very high risk cases like preeclampsia, heart disease, and so on. Right? Any questions? Most welcome. Okay. Okay. Okay, then if you have no questions, we'll end the meeting. Okay, all the best to all of you. Good day. Be safe.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you for your patient listening, first of all. Yeah.